It would appear when it comes to talking about the Windows 98 machine. Boy, oh boy, am I wrong. So, what all has happened here is a lot of things. So, this all started kind of during VCF West, where I was thinking about what I kind of want to do with these machines after the show. And given how things were going, I really wanted to transplant the internals between my two tower builds here, so to speak, because I had the Leanne Lee case, which I still do have, and that was where my Windows 98 system was being held. Then I had this NVIDIA trade show PC case, at least that's what I'm told by the person who gave it to me, and this was housing my Core 2 quad build. Turns out the Core 2 quad wasn't exactly a fan of the airflow in this case, or something like that, because it was really not keeping itself cool, and I decided I wanted to just move things around, because I like this case a whole hell of a lot more than I like the Leanne Lee case. So I spent the last 2 nights transitioning everything over. I've still got a lot to do because the innards of the Vista build that was in here are still scattered throughout my workshop. In fact, I can kind of show off one of those now. This guy is what was in the Vista build and what was in here. And it's an overkill board, of course, and that's going to be actually transitioning to a new motherboard, I believe, because I did pick up an MSI board from somebody at VCF. It's around the same era. I think it supports more Core 2 quad CPUs, like the later Wolfdale ones, I believe they're called. I can't remember Intel's code names. But I am going to transition over to that board too with the Core 2 quad machine. But that machine is really more awesome but impractical. And my main XP machine, if I'm perfectly honest, is my Shuttle XPC. But we're kind of getting off into the weeds a little bit when this video is about the Windows 98 machine. So this has had quite the journey to where it is right now. Previously, it was running a 1.26 gigahertz Tualatin Pentium 3, and that was going to be the incarnation of the Windows 98 machine that was going to go to VCF. I'm calling that one the third incarnation of the Windows 98 machine because the second one was a Coppermine custom build, and the first, where this all began, was a Dell Dimension 4100. So now you know where everything kind of went. I had a Tualatin-based system in here, and initially the plan was going to be to transition this all to a socket 462 system after VCF. I didn't want to do it beforehand because I'd finally gotten the system stable and I didn't want to mess with it. But then an opportunity I couldn't pass up came along. A friend of mine who was also with me at VCF, we did one big mega table. He spotted an Alienware Area 51 at eWaste and wanted me to pick it up if it was still there. So I did and paid quite a sum for it. More than I'm used to from eWaste is all I'm going to say, but not eBay prices, God no. We agreed to go halfsies on it, but it was so expensive because of the internals inside of it. Not necessarily because, and I'm going to go ahead and take the side door off here, not necessarily because of the motherboard and CPU, which we can see here. It is a Pentium 4 Northwood 3.2 gigahertz in the socket 478 form factor, but it was the video card, which is a GeForce FX 5950 Ultra, which you go look on eBay, those things are insanity as far as pricing is concerned. And I kind of can see why, because the FX line is really, it was not that great for Windows XP as far as I know, like late XP era games. But when you start looking at it as a Windows 98 and early XP card, suddenly it looks like a lot better of a card. But I got one for a killer deal, and thankfully all it needed was a good cleaning out, and that was about it. The heatsink feels like it is like thermally glued to the CPU die, so I did not want to push my luck with that. I left it as is, and thankfully SpeedFan can pick up the temperature sensors on the card, and it looks to be running at a decent temperature, so I'm not going to mess with it. But the desktop board, since we're in here, is an Intel desktop board D875PBZ, which is a tongue twister, but also it has a lot of stuff that I would need add-in cards for on the other systems. It has native SATA, which was a royal pain to get working, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. But it also has integrated gigabit Ethernet, which is good timing because unfortunately my gigabit Ethernet card for Windows 98 died and I'm not sure what happened to it. And that means it frees up PCI slots, which is good because the new GPU is a double wide card, meaning I have less slots to work with anyway. But I only have to use 2 slots because everything else is integrated into the board, which is quite nice. Let's talk about those cards right now. The first one you can see here down from the GPU is an Audigy 2ZS from Creative, and that was a very late last minute upgrade because I was trying to run Longhorn on this system to really experience it, and it turns out the Aureal Vortex 2 that was in here kind of had its last hurrah in Windows XP. Past that, newer OSs have no idea what to do with it, including Longhorn in this case, so I would get no sound no matter what driver I tried to install. So unfortunately, because this is becoming more of a hybrid system rather than a strictly 98 system, I made the decision to just move up to an Audigy 2ZS, as that has way better compatibility with newer OSs. And I think it's worse in DOS. I don't know, but I also don't really do DOS games. And in fact, I'm not going to be doing DOS games on this machine because Destiny is calling. At VCF West, a quick sidebar here, I actually met Ian, aka Pulpo, aka Pico Man, and he is just as awesome of a human as he is online in person. At the end of the show, he gave me a freebie and just said, I trust that one day you will build an ISA system and you'll have this ready for it. So I do want to build an ISA system at some point, but that's going to be in the future. Moving down from the Audigy 2ZS, we have the venerable Adaptec AHA2940UW, which is connected to a blue SCSI in the front here to serve as an optical drive emulator because I am done dealing with daemon tools. Now on newer OSs, actually Power ISO runs as far back as Windows XP, and I find it a lot more reliable, so thankfully for XP, I'm covered with that, but for 98, the blue SCSI does come in clutch here, so I don't have to deal with sketchy tools that may or may not trash my install. Also, if you probably noticed the weird fan on the CPU heatsink, there was a 3D printed adapter that allows me to put a 60mm fan on the heatsink for the Pentium 4, which is quite nice because the stock fan on there was starting to die off and did not sound very good. It is my goal to find the mounting hardware to be able to put one of these badass coolers on here. This Zalman cooler has just... I cannot convey the weight over video to you. This thing weighs a ton, and I really want to put that on this system, but unfortunately I lack the mounting hardware, so it's going to have to wait. I may have some leads on the mounting hardware. I really hope they come through, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, we have 1 gig of DDR RAM, and you might be thinking, well, Xodium, that's danger zone for Windows 98. Oh my god. Well, I wanted to make it work because it's OCZ RAM, which is very of the time and very aesthetic, at least to me. So I did make it work because thanks to Rudolph Lowe, rest in peace, an awesome dude who made a lot of patches for Windows 98 to make it usable on more modern hardware, and he has one called PatchMem that does exactly what it sounds like it does. It patches Windows 98 to not break on anything more than 512 megs of RAM, and it works beautifully on this system, and I'm very happy to have discovered it. So, with that said, let's turn to the front and talk about the front. So here things are looking almost standard. We have our USB ports, FireWire, which is hooked into the Audigy 2ZS because it does have FireWire. Have not tried it, but I'm going to assume it works. We have an optical drive up top here, which is poorly aligned. I'll probably have to fix that in a minute. But that's from a iMac G4, just a quick refurbishing, cleaning out and cleaning the laser, and it came back to life, and now it's in here. And as you can see, I'm kind of going for a black and silver scheme here, except for the blue SCSI, which is dark royal blue, so the paint says. And I quite like the shade of blue, and it blends in enough. But down for that, we have a black floppy drive, which I also got from the Alienware that hosted the rest of the parts. And then down from that, you might be wondering what this is. Some of you may know, but for those who don't, it's a quick swap bay for a 2.5-inch drive. And this allows me to swap OSs on the fly without having to worry about reinstalling them, dealing with the blue SCSI, because the blue SCSI is kind of iffy in my experience with trying to boot PC operating systems. And I'm sure that's a user error on my part because I haven't really dug into it too much on PCs, but I just find it way easier and way faster to use SATA because SATA is blisteringly fast on these old machines. So that's pretty much it for this case. Let's put the side panel back on and boot her up. Now, unfortunately, in a previous take of this video, because I don't know how many takes I'm up to at this point, I did try to boot Windows 98. Appropriately, Windows 98 decided to wait until we got home from VCF West and then blew up on me. So I don't think we're going to be running Windows XP. So let's put this back on, and I do like the way the door goes back on this case. The LAN leak fights me a lot. This one just kind of slots in to this channel, I say as I'm starting to struggle with it. But there we go. Good and done. So let's kill the lights and have some fun. That sounded dirtier than I meant for it to. Now the light show. I really wish I could have put cold cathode in here, but that's very much awesome but impractical. Hey, do you remember when I was talking about that bit with like setting SATA modes and such earlier? Didn't think I'd quiz you on that, would you? Don't worry, there's no quiz. What do you think this is, school? So I'm here to talk about this with this particular board and maybe some other era-appropriate Intel boards. You have to really pay attention to some of this stuff because if you don't, you'll fire up the machine and it'll act like there's no OS installed, and you'll audibly do a WTF at the screen while it just sits there looking at you like you just committed a sin. So let's get into it. So if you're setting this up for the first time with Windows 98, one of the things you want to do is make sure the ATA modes are set correctly, because if we go down to drive configuration here, you're going to see this, and it's probably going to be defaulted to enhanced. Now, if you have it on enhanced, Windows 98 surprisingly will act like it's working. It'll boot into Windows 98, it'll seem to be okay, but Windows 98 will break in such a big way, and you won't catch it until it's too late. It'll just be slow, erratic, your I/O speeds will be all over the place. You need to set this to legacy for Windows 98 to function properly, and because in this case I have my optical drive on the primary parallel ATA bus, I have it set to SATA P0, P1, parallel ATA primary, but you can switch this depending on where your drives are. Or if you don't use any of the parallel ATA connectors, you could just turn them off entirely, but in this case, I am still using them. I'm going to have it set to that. Everything else you can leave as is, and if you're just setting this for the first time, your drives might not be listed here properly. Ignore that, just reboot, try again. Your drive should come up here after that. So, with that set, we go back and we go to boot. Now this is another gotcha that if you're like me and you have a quick swap system with your drives, this will likely catch you out here and there. So we go down to hard disk drives, and you want to go in here, and if you've swapped drives, the drive you've swapped is probably going to end up at second drive here, like my Patriot Torch has. Because I do have one 1 terabyte hard drive in there kind of as the permanent drive. Then the SSDs are, as you can see, swappable. So when you swap the drives, it knows the drives have changed because of their identifiers, and it will always put them at the second drive here. And what happens is when you reboot the system, it's going to try and boot from the fixed drive that's in the system permanently mounted in there. And that has no operating system, so it's going to be like, we couldn't find an operating system on that drive. And it'll make you think something's wrong with your SSD. You don't want that. So every time you swap drives, you have to come in here and make sure they are ordered correctly. So I'm going to leave it as is to demonstrate what happens when it is not set correctly. But once you're done with that, you want to go into boot device priority and make sure this is also set correctly, because if it's not set as the first drive, what's going to happen is the first drive set in that previous dialog is going to be here and only here. As you can see, the SSD doesn't show up at all. So once again, I'm going to intentionally not configure this correctly, and you'll see what happens after it goes through the long boot process, which I'll probably cut out in post. So here we go. And as expected, NTLDR is missing. So you'd probably think something went horribly wrong and you need to reimage your drive. But in fact, it's only doing this because it's trying to start from the spinning hard drive that has no OS on it. So what we can usually do here in this case is if I hit a key, it'll cycle to the next OS or the next drive, and there's Windows XP. But sometimes, at least with like my Windows 2000 install, it's not smart enough to do that, and it'll just sit there and stare at you and not actually do anything until you go back and set everything as it should. So if you're having issues with one of these Intel desktop boards from this era with boot devices, you'll want to go in and make sure that's all set correctly. So as we can see here, we have Windows XP, we have AIM, because we were playing around with an AIM instance at VCF. We have a speed fan here, which thankfully does read the sensors on the GPU, so I can pop a look at these. I do not need help. I've used this for decades at this point. But it does see everything, which is really nice. Everything is fine. I need to reconnect the top fan because that should be spinning, but it's not. Anyway, give you a quick demo here. Let's run 3D Mark 2001. We have 3D Mark 05, but I have found 3D Mark 05 to be way heavier on era-appropriate systems than it should be. Plus, most games, if 3D Mark 01 gives me a good score, that's generally indicative of the games I play on these systems. So let's benchmark and we'll cut to the end. All right, 16,000 3D marks. So pretty good showing, I feel. 6600 GT gets a little bit more than this. I could be wrong. But yeah, fairly good showing overall. Interestingly enough, my portable XP machine, which is a 2010 MacBook, gets about 20,000, so definitely beats this system, but I mean, it's a Core 2 Duo, what do you expect? So let's go ahead and close this out, and finally, as a treat, we will run some Unreal Tournament, but I'm going to do a quick temp check here, see if this is exhausting air, as it should. I am getting a little bit of warmth out the back. Yeah, we're still sitting at a nice 35C. CPU is still 42, so let's play some Unreal Tournament. And unfortunately, there is going to be no sound because I do not have the audio bar set up right now. Let's go ahead and look at the settings. Fog distance is turned down just a touch. Everything is normal, 1024 by 768. And I'm going to just skip the pleasantries here and go straight for violence. Go to Assault. Now, Convoy is a very heavy map, I've found. It stresses systems out because the environment in the background is constantly moving, being rendered in addition to everything going on. So generally, systems are going to have trouble with this, so we'll see how it fares. And we're indoors right now, so nothing really going on. But now we're outside, and you can see why I think this map is fairly heavy. Bring up our FPS counter here. Yeah, we're dipping down into the 40s, high 30s, but given the age of this system and what it's doing, and it's running at 1024 by 768, like, I could turn this down to 800 by 600 and probably eke out a few more frames, turn down the settings a little bit, but this is playable, and we're just at normal, so very good showing for the system overall. If I put the 6600 GT in here, it could probably do a little bit better, maybe, possibly. But this is still a good showing for this system as it is. Let's see if it's exhausting air as it should. And yeah, I would say it's doing pretty good. 3637C is plenty okay. So that's pretty much it for this system and this bit of a yap fest, as I like to do. Hopefully you enjoyed this look at what has become my pride and joy, the culmination of my work over the last year or so, because this journey really began back in late 2023, early 2024, all because I decided I wanted to play some PC games and got the Dimension 4100 down off the shelf, and well, it led to all this, I guess, and I'm very happy where it ended up, and I'm very happy to have a very awesome Windows 98 machine that can also step up to Windows XP and do some Longhorn shenanigans too, if I so please. But yeah, till the next video, hopefully you enjoyed this. If you have a comment, feel free to drop it down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye for now.